Hey, so at the risk of repeating some things I've already said, I want to comment a bit more on the um, Extinction Rebellion protests and the wider issues around climate change. There's a huge number of issues to discuss here, too many to encompass in one video, but I want to just talk about these specific protests and the approach they're taking. I know I made a video about this a few days ago, but there's been a few developments since then. Firstly, the organisers say they're going to change their tactics from direct action to putting pressure on governments. Now, why not do that in the first place? I'm very critical of the approach they took because, and I take this view with any sort of campaign or cause, Black Lives Matter done the same thing. When you polarize the public, when you take actions that it's more than inconveniencing people, it seriously disrupts people's lives. I think organizers have this idea, oh well, will shock people and that will get attention to the issue. What they just don't get is that it makes them look out of touch, smug, and selfish. They will, of course, counter, oh, but we're not selfish because this is for the planet, for everyone. And ultimately, the issues are about that. Climate change is a profoundly important issue. But there's a few, I've been following this, and I think they have this kind of smug idea that they're the only people who care because they're the only people taking those approaches, and the rest of us are just charlatans who don't care about the planet. I read a story that a friend of mine she posted that a colleague of hers was caught up by the protests. He cycles to work. He works for a sustainable energy company, and he couldn't go to work because of the protests. In one incident in one of the London bridges, protesters were gluing themselves to the bridge. Now think of not only the police resources, which could be used tackling violent crime, but also think of the mess that that glue causes to the surface. Think of the water resources that are used, or whatever it would be, to get rid of the glue. So I think a lot of people find it a little bit galling, the hypocrisy of these protesters. And some of them are celebrities. The actress Emma Thompson, flying in on a plane to attend the protests. I mean, are these celebrities really so out of touch that they cannot see that their hypocrisy will be picked up? The Times had a very funny cartoon which showed Emma Thompson on the side of a plane. Says I think the catchline was "Do as I say, not as I do." Like it was kind of quoting or parodying and like an airplane slogan. A star of these protests, if that's the right word, is the Swedish teenager Greta Thunberg. She's 16. I think she looks a lot younger. That's not really here or there, but it is significant because I think that's a little bit of populism on the part of the Campaigners, they get this teenage girl. She's very smart. She's very confident. She speaks to world leaders, and no politician is going to argue with her because she's become the darling of the movement. And I think she's sincere, but it's all cute and it's all she's so smart. Look at this brave teenager lecturing world leaders. But she's saying that they don't care, and I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's a fair criticism. Governments over the last 10 years have had to act on climate change. I mean, what do these campaigners think of the Paris Climate Agreement? What do they think about the fact that governments now are definitely putting this far more to the centre of their agenda? Okay, maybe not as much as they would like. Maybe they want the targets brought far more forward, but their counterproductive measures, they're too arrogant to see that A, it polarizes the public. I mean, I really think they need to speak to people, for example, who may be going to a family funeral and who may have had their flight cancelled. I don't think that Heathrow protests actually went ahead, but let's say for the sake of argument it did. And they caused someone to miss a flight, they were going to a family funeral. That's just callous. It's selfish. I would like them to actually justify that to the people whose lives they have disrupted. and say, oh, well, we don't want climate change, it's for all of us, so you shouldn't be pissed off, really. We don't care. Also, I would like to ask these campaigners, can they honestly, hand on heart, say for the rest of their lives they're not never going to take a plane anywhere? I very much doubt many of them could commit to that. So I think, have these protests been successful? They've got attention. They've been described as one of the biggest civil disobedience uprisings, rebellions, whatever you want to call it, protests in modern British history. And there's been other protests around the world. I think that's true. I think they've got attention, but not for what they think, not for bringing attention to climate change. This is the irony. The attention is on their methods. The attention is on the police resources being used to arrest them. Now, people might say, "Oh, deal with the real criminals," and I agree that some hippie or someone gluing themselves to a bridge is not obviously the same danger to the public that some knife thug is, but the police had to act. I mean, they couldn't just have a situation where people were locking down our capital city selfishly, disrupting people's way of life and just saying, oh, that's fine. We can do this without consequence. And the fascist police, how dare they arrest us? One of the organizers said, we're using the same tactics as Gandhi and Martin Luther King. We're using civil disobedience while respecting the opposition. Well, it's not very respectful to disrupt people's way of life and not care about it, not show any recognition whatsoever that those tactics are hurting people. It's not just inconveniencing people, it's actually hurting people. I mean, transport chaos is one thing that really does have significance in people's quality of life. And like I say, they're too arrogant to take a second to consider, well, me trying to hold up this plane at a runway, maybe people really need to be on that. It's not just people on holiday. It could be people's livelihoods if they're doing business deals or if they're going to family. There's a lot of things that I think they need to consider. Um, I mean, my grandfather passed away recently. We're not taking a plane to Belfast. We're probably taking a ferry. But that's just an example. Now, if that got held up, I'm okay, but I know that would be very hard on my father. So I think the tactics are incredibly selfish, and they're too smug and they're too self-righteous to notice it. It's not that their argument is wrong. Their fundamental argument is more needs to be done about climate change. Governments need to take this seriously. They seem to think that the opposition, people who take issue with the protests, are arguing about climate change. Most people aren't actually. What they're arguing about, what people are angry about, is these stupid, polarizing, counterproductive tactics. They never work. They don't work. And that, I suspect, is why they've had to change the tactics, because they've realized that. They'll never admit it, of course. But if you're watching this and you're part of this rebellion, I would simply ask you to consider what your actions are doing. Maybe you're not, causing flight delays, but if you're gluing yourself to a bridge, think of the damage that is causing, the glue, you know? I mean, are they going to be picking up the litter that they caused from these sit-in protests? I think there's a lot of hypocrisy, and I think they need to answer to that. Can they say, with a straight face, for the rest of my life, I will not use a plane? What if they want to attend, like, a climate action conference? How are they going to organize if they can't travel? So there's a lot of obvious questions about this movement, and others like it. They think that people don't care about the issues. Actually, many people do. Maybe not everyone cares as much as they do, but they're painting this picture that we're the only ones that care, and we need to shame governments, and we need to um, get our little 16-year-old star to make herself look all innocent, shame world leaders, and how brave is she? I take a pretty dim view of it, to be honest, because I think that's populism on their part. They know full well that getting a 16-year-old young woman to No world leader is going to argue with her, are they? So it's kind of like playing up populist method, and I'm frankly a bit cynical of that. I mean, I hate to say it, but because it's better that a young person is involved in something like this than gangs. But frankly, I think she's the sort of young person that would get on a lot of people's nerves because going around lecturing adults might be very cool, might be very trendy. I'm sure she's smart, but she also has to realize and understand, and so do the rest of these protesters, that people's livelihoods also matter. And when you're disrupting people's ways of life, when you're disrupting people's jobs, when you're disrupting all those things, you're hurting people. And in the grand scheme of things, people are the number one thing. So climate change is a vitally important issue. It is. I personally think there's a lot more can be done. For example, I see so much plastic waste. I mean, I definitely think that's an issue. I often get photographs developed in boots, and they give me a CD for that. They put cellophane wrapping on the CD, totally unnecessary. Um, Things like that. The amount of packaging on food that's unnecessary, where you get packages inside packages, and that's causing massive problems for the world's oceans. So I'm not coming from this kind of ignorant viewpoint of, oh, it's all made up. I mean, who am I going to believe? Who are most people going to believe? Most of the world scientists or people in the oil industry, people with vested interests. So it is a very real issue. Storms are getting more intense, and we are seeing lives impacted all around the world by this. I don't think it's necessarily that more people are dying from storms, because if we look at the previous decades, I mean, some of the deadliest storms on record were in the 1970s. The 1970 Bangladesh cyclone, Cyclone Nina in 1975. Some of the world's worst natural disasters actually occurred in the 1970s. However, the frequency of storms is increasing and their intensity is also increasing. So there are some very real issues going on, but I just think their methods. I think that they are self-righteous. I think they're ignorant of how they come across, and I think they're selfish. I don't think they're evil. I don't think they're bad people, but I do think they're selfish and they don't realize. You know, I mean, put it this way: if I had a very important engagement, like I had to go to a family funeral or something like that, and my flight had been delayed because some protesters glued themselves to the runway, the same protesters would probably have no problem using a plane themselves. So what people find galling is the hypocrisy, and if they cannot understand that, they don't deserve to be, given a platform, really, if they're too arrogant to see their own failings.